station that gets down to business.
Thank you for tuning in for this edition of Justice Watch with Attorney Zulu Ali. I am Attorney Zulu Ali with the Justice Watch crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, Dr. Akil Bashir, and Andrea Rodeman. This week, like every week, we'll be discussing critical, legal, and social justice issues that are impacting our community. Today, we'll be talking about the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Of course, tomorrow is the day, the holiday, Dr. King Day, where we take this opportunity to, you know, recognize Dr. King and Dr. King's accomplishments and the greatness that he actually brought to this country. And so, I think this is an extremely important day. And I guess, like in many days, when we begin to start recognizing great leaders and great figures in our history, a lot of it depends on. It means so many different things to different people, and I think Dr. King is one of those figures that basically, means different things to different individuals. I guess I want to begin with regards to Dr. King as to, at least for me personally, what I think Dr. King, actually means. I think that when we talk about, and I talk quite often about the greatness of America, and we often use the term, that America is the greatest nation in the world. And when we talk about America being the greatest nation, I think what is actually interesting when it comes to that particular issue is that America, at least for me, Dr. King kind of serves as a catalyst as to that greatness. And I can tell you what I mean by him serving as a catalyst to the greatness of America. I think that when we begin to start looking at, the American history, I think we can, at least for me, I separate that greatness into two periods. The first period that I do is I address it as the pre-Dr. King period and post-Dr. King period. And when we talk about the pre-Dr. King period, I think that there was that was a dark day in American history, the time prior to Dr. King, and that begins with the history that of the transatlantic slave trade, and which I think began about 1619, I think officially, and the fact that America was a nation that had the ugly history of enslaving humans, and that's a very dark time in American history. And we can't call ourselves a great nation in any way relative to the enslavement of people of color. And there's other issues that we can talk about when we talk about even the indigenous people during that period of time, which is extremely dark period in American history from our very beginning, right? Followed up, we fast forward until the time of what we refer to as the Black Codes. After the emancipation, the fact that America engaged in creating all of these unfair and inhumane laws that were targeted at African Americans and people of color, that's a very dark time in American history. And of course, then we kind of, make our way towards this time period of the Jim Crow era. So as we're going through this period up until the Jim Crow era, that was a very dark history in America. I mean, I don't think that anybody, at least any reasonable person, is going to suggest that a society that was engaged in a type of inhumane treatment against a specific group of individuals is anything to suggest would in any way be great. What happened around 1955, primarily with the Montgomery bus boycott and the time that Dr. King was really engulfed himself into the civil rights movement, and that time period where he was involved in the desegregation of almost all institutions within the American society. Uh, I think after that, during that period, there's so much that changed in America. Um, and the movement that surrounded Dr. King. And I'm not trying to say that Dr. King obviously did not do it by himself, but obviously during this period, during this movement, Dr. King was really the centerpiece of this particular movement. And during this movement, we saw so many things change within our society. From 1955 until approximately 1964, 19, even up until the time of his assassination into 1968, we saw this progression in America and the enactment of the Civil Rights Act and so many different things that happened in America that changed America. He changed Dr. King and the movement that surrounded him changed the face of America. He is really that bridge between the ugly darkness of America and a transformation of America becoming a better nation. And I think that we have to look at that when we think of America. Many individuals have, of course, the reference point for people is different depending on who you are. But I think the reference point for people of color, especially black people, has to be during that particular period of time where he actually, because of his sacrifice and the people around him and the fact that he gave his life to make America a better society, is what we have to go to whenever we begin to start talking about the greatness, of America. And the greatness of America, and let's talk about that a little bit so that I can be clear what I mean by greatness of America. The greatness of America is the vision that Dr. King often spoke about during his speeches and his writings and his vision of unity among people based upon, this sense of humanity. And that was his vision. All of the leaders are the so-called founding fathers of this country did not envision that. They only envisioned that for certain people. They did not envision that for people of color, specifically black people. That was not their vision. And so, I cannot in good conscience sit here and rally around and try to use that in any way as a reference point, because that's just absolutely not true. The transition of America and the transition of America in a way in which changed the ideology for people of color came during that time period of Dr. King's movement and many of the movements that came around the Dr. King era. But that is a reference point. Dr. King serves as that reference point. And many of the movements that came around it, whether you're talking about the Black Panther Party, and even when you're talking about even the more progressive movements, that was a time period that changed America into what we can now consider the greatest nation in the world. There are those who would disagree with that, and obviously there's reasons behind it, because obviously we got a whole lot of work to do. There's no question that we are not where we want to be, as a country. But what I can say is that the progression from 1955 to 1968 definitely was a movement that impacted the centuries of oppression against people of color that is just astounding. It's just unbelievable as to what was accomplished during that period. And so many people gave their life just so that we could get to a point where we could even have a vision of equality, just to get laws changed, right? It took us to that point just to get equal laws, right? And and that's where it starts. That's what the greatness is the laws that we have, but the laws were not there prior to that. We lived in a country that at the very essence, it was the law of the land. The law of the land was inequality. The law of the land were to treat people differently based upon their perceived, the color of their skin. Um, and that wasn't some evil stuff. That was extremely evil, and that was an ugly time period in America. However, at least at this point, based upon the sacrifices of Dr. King and people within his movement and other movements, we were able to at least change the law so that it could so that it could serve as a reference point, as a way of us at least using the law to make us, that's just humane laws, right? To take away those Jim Crow and black codes and other things. So now the work is trying to get the country to enforce those laws. That is the challenge that we have at this point. And so, and to me, I think that's what we're fighting for. That is what makes the nation worth fighting for. Not because of our dark history, beginning with what happened to the Native Americans and other indigenous people of this land, not because of the centuries of the inhumane treatment of black people and other people of color, and the fact that this became such a prosperous country based upon uncompensated labor and unpurchased land, and the fact that people have benefited from that. However, when we came to this time period of Dr. King and his movement, we were at least able to move ourselves in a position where we can say at least and let's just also get something straight, and we talked about this several weeks ago. A lot of people, not only black people and other people of color, uh, um, benefited from these laws. uh, the whole country benefited from it. Specifically, whether you're talking about women or whether you're talking about other people that consider themselves marginalized, you can thank Dr. King for that. Because prior to that time period, that's just not the way things worked in this country. So that's what when you see someone like myself who can when I think of the Mount Rushmore of the great leaders of American history, I have different faces in my mind. It doesn't and for me to suggest that America is not a great country, then I feel like that it is in many ways disrespectful to some of the people, such as Dr. King, who gave their life. So that's my reference point. So I want to be clear for many of us today who are willing to stay in this country and continue his fight. That's the greatness. People like that who changed the country. Not the fact that the country allows someone like Dr. King to exist. It's the fact that someone like Dr. King made America a better nation, right? And so, again, I think that's the way that we have to look at America, and look at, there's two phases and two time periods when we talk about that issue. So I don't know how far we're getting to our break, but I'm going to ask you, Rosa, what does Dr. King mean to you?
I think I agree with you in the aspect of that he's definitely a catalyst to showcasing the greatness and where America can be if we work together and and just unite. And I think that when it comes to King's own Dr. King's dream, I think the gist of it was achieving racial integration. And I think that still kind of terrifies people, 60 years later. I think that's where we're having a hiccup.
Right.
I think that his ideal vision of racial integration is really not only sharing power, but also sharing space, having a piece of the pie. And I think that's where we struggle because while we are integrated in schools now, right, we still have the issue of equity and equality.
Right.
And so, yeah, I agree with you in that he definitely did come to change the status quo, the norm of the time period. And he made us realize that there is power in unity, regardless of what race you belong to, what social structure or group you belong to. And I think that's what they were also scared of, that he had this idea of unity that came together. And I think that's also what we struggle with today. We think of George Floyd and how that united a lot of people. It was an international movement. And why did they have to give us a slight piece of the pie? Well, because they understand the power that there is in unity because of Dr. King. Right.
That's so true. And what's interesting about when you talk about Dr. King, and really what's sad is that the one thing that's great that you can talk about when it comes to the issue of Dr. King is he cannot be pigeonholed into this whole idea that he was a man that was only concerned about one race. You see what I'm saying? Or one type of person. You know what I mean? I think that what happens is that when people, especially when you're talking about Dr. King, when you talk about the holiday, his own day that we have coming up, tomorrow, is it? I think that it is the ultimate day of patriotism, right? Because the idea, at least from my perspective, the idea of true patriotism is when you sacrifice for everybody, right? That's what a real true patriot is, right? And there is no person in American history that exemplifies that ideology than Dr. King.
Exactly.
Right? And so, so for me, I think that your true patriotism oftentimes is going to be, because, of course, I can get on later in the show, I'll talk about things that are controversial with Dr. King and how some people might not have necessarily co-signed his ideology or any of the things, that he did. But the one thing that you cannot accuse him of is not being a person that was colorblind in his ideology, his pursuit, and his fight and his struggle, right? And so for me, when you start talking about some of the other leaders and their patriotism, is the fact that they were fighting for an ideology that was very selfish, right? A patriot is not a selfish person, and it's very easy to fight for something that you believe in. That's not really that's not difficult. If you have your own belief, it's easy to fight for what you believe in because, for the lack of a better way of explaining it, that's very selfish and self-centered. However, Dr. King never just fought for what he believed in. He fought for what everybody believed in. No matter what you believed in, who you were, his fight was a fight for humanity, without question. And so that's what makes it outstanding. Because all the other leaders that we had were in some way, whether directly or indirectly, fighting for their own interest. Dr. King was not just fighting for his interest. He was fighting for the interest of everyone. And that's the reason why I say that if you truly want to see the face of patriotism of America, Dr. King has to be that face. No matter what you thought about him, he's got to be that face. Nobody else exemplifies that more than him. And so he does serve as that bridge between the ugliness of American society. And when I talk about the ugliness of American society, I'm talking about something that goes way beyond slavery. You know what I mean? I'm talking about everything from what happened to the indigenous people that some person he thought he was in India, so he didn't find nothing, right? In fact, he was lost. And then you have the entire almost destroying of an entire people. Then you have, and I'm not just talking about Native Americans. We know that there were other people in North America other than what we traditionally call Native Americans. There are other people that are across the border that were also Native, right? Then you have you come to the slave trade. I mean, that's on the other side of it. So we have history of that. And that's the reason why I think that all people should appreciate the fact of what he stood for. You know what I mean? And I mean, and the fact that, that he did make America great. That's the true. When you said make America great again, that's the face that he should show. That shouldn't be MAGA. It should be a picture of Dr. King. And so, that's just my feeling on it.
Exactly. And I think that the movement, he fought for racial integration, but the movement itself integrated people from different colors, right? From different races, from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And that in itself proves that regardless, black, white, brown, came together and fought for something and won.
Right.
And that is scary to a lot of people because he fought for it for the entire America. Mm-hmm. But his own movement integrated people of different colors, races, and socioeconomic statuses.
Right.
And I think that's what we're scared of nowadays.
Yeah.
We're scared of the power that a movement like that will have in 2022,
right?
2023.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and what's also disingenuous about Dr. King is because this is the picture and the narrative that we paint of Dr. King. He, in many ways, from many of academics, activists, progressives, see Dr. King more or less as more of a passive type of leader, right? I mean, that's kind of the way that he's seen, or that's the picture that they paint. And we allow the so-called powers to create a narrative that Dr. King was not, was passive, accommodationalist, and really integration was something that really hurt black people as opposed to helping black people. That is the narrative that many people, take with Dr. King. The reason why I feel like it's really disingenuous is because, Dr. King did something that most of us will never do, right? I mean, in other words, it's what he believed in. He believed in this whole idea, not just helping his people, but he did have this idea of people, human beings are human beings, and that race should not matter. Now, is that reality? Of course it's not. But you can't say he's wrong, right? You can't say that that ideology is the wrong ideology. We can argue all day, and there is a whole lot of righteousness about the fact that that's not the way that certain people, that many people see us as black people, right? But at the same time, you know, regardless of your, let's just say, let me create the scenario. And the scenario is that there is a large number, or there was a significant number of the majority of people in this country who either actively participated in mistreating people of color, specifically black people and other people. And there's a significant number of people who sat by and did nothing about it, right? The question would be, how do we see that? I mean, how do you, how should you, what narrative does that really create? For me, as I get older, right? When I was younger, I would probably have definitely maybe a different spin on it. But as I get older, I begin to understand that you do not allow evil to make you evil. You see what I mean? So in other words, let's just assume that there were a significant number of people in our society that were doing what I just described. And we often say, well, as people of color, specifically black people, there's a lot more that we should have done. Right? We need to help each other. We need to basically, come together as a people, and we need to figure out a way that we can, become independent and stop being oppressed and be, pro who you are, right? And there is some truth about that. However, at some degree, you don't want that evil to turn you into that evil. You see what I'm saying? So the point is, what does it really look like? If someone enslaved you for centuries, if someone, becomes nationalist and say that I'm only going to be about my own people, to the extent that it makes you treat other people bad, is that really what you want to be? Is it really privilege? Right? And there's nothing about that look that impresses me. There's nothing about that look that makes me think, you know what, we should be in that position. There's nothing about that. You see what I mean? So I hope I'm being really clear at what I'm trying to describe, because oftentimes you have to, you can't think that you got to be the devil to beat the devil. You see what I mean? And I want to be perfectly clear. Or am I suggesting that, and I don't want my words to be misconstrued of saying that white people are devils, because I'm not saying that white people are devils. What I'm saying is that if you happen to be whatever color you are, and you think that what happened in the early history of America was righteous, then I'm saying you got a problem. You see what I'm saying? So I'm saying that if you and I should be on the same accord, you and I should see things the same. We're not going to have a problem as long as, you know, if you are about humanity, if you treat me with respect, if you know, you're about looking out for your fellow man, then me and you have something in common. I have no problem with you. But if you think something different and you think that it's okay, then we have a problem. You know what I'm saying? And to be quite honest with you, it doesn't even make any difference what color you are. You see what I mean? And so,
yeah, and I think that's what he meant. He said it. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Yeah.
He didn't mention color. He didn't mention race. He didn't mention any of that.
Right.
Injustice anywhere,
right,
regardless of where it is, should be a threat to our justice everywhere.
right. Yeah, I mean, and I mean, when you think about, and that's what I'm saying. When it comes to his legacy, I think that everybody in that movement, in my opinion, whether you're talking about Dr. King's movement and whether you're talking about some of the other movements, I think that extreme situations it cause extreme measures. And many of these individuals understood that when you have been, the psychological aspect of what has happened to, black people and other people of color was huge. And many of the movements were not just movements to necessarily change, all of the negative things that were going on in society externally, that the damage internally and psychologically were just as bad. You know what I mean? And so, it's amazing when it comes to us, and this is just, it was a crime against humanity. There's no question. And one of the things that people often talk about when they're victims of crime is the psychological aspect of being a victim of a crime. That's not new. You know what I mean? We talk about it every day. Whenever someone is a victim of a crime and a person who perpetuates that crime, one of the things that happens at some point in the case is what they call a victim impact statement. And a victim impact statement is where the victim of a crime gets an opportunity to let the court know that the injustice that were perpetuated against them, how it impacted their lives, other than just the event, but what happens. Like you'll have someone who is a victim of a robbery or a victim of a burglary or whatever it is, or an assault. If it doesn't stop with the assault, it continues with the psychological impact on that individual. You know what I mean? And there's a video that I've shared on our website about Dr. King and I titled it "The Lie They Told." And in it he talks. Have you heard that video? Huh? Where he talks about the fact that how they try to say that everything black is bad. And he talks about being black and being beautiful. What was he saying? So for one person, someone could say, well, Dr. King was saying something racist about black people being beautiful, right? But that's not what he was that's not his whole that's not what he was doing. You see what I'm saying? What he was doing was he was just saying that basically they've got you thinking that you're a nobody. See, that's part of the whole crime against people in early history that's why they went out of their way to say so many negative. The cartoon, everything that they did is they tried everything they could to make black people look bad or ugly or whatever. So that was actually part of the healing process. That's actually part of the truth about the fact that they had to, it's the same thing with human trafficking. You know, they say that the reason why human traffickers, they say negative things about the people that they're human trafficking so they could tear them down. And so, so the reason why I'm going into this particular subject matter and making these particular statements is because I think it's extremely important for us to go beyond this whole thing about Dr. King just being a day for black people, right? Or celebrating Dr. King is a way of just talking about black people. The reason why people say stuff like that is because they're racist. That's the bottom line. If you understand American history and you understand what has happened to people of color, and although I say I don't like using that word, and I'm going to redefine that, that's sickness. That's inhumanity. And then that person needs to check their own humanity, right? And they need to study Dr. King. They need to read his speeches. They need to read about his life. And they need to read about who he really is as a human being and what he was trying to do. And the fact that he sacrificed so much so that we can, live in the society that we live in today. Because I can tell you this. There's no question in my mind. At the rate that we were going in 1955, had he not entered the scene and did what he did to change the face of America, America would not be here today. They would have burned this place completely down. There's no way. He did two things. He saved America because he served as a way of letting people know that there's an alternative way to trying to address your grievances without doing it in a violent way. Right? He set that blueprint because people were tired of being treated that way. And, without being shown that particular way, I'm not so sure that the way in which the marching and the nonviolent tactics that he utilized, I'm telling you, they would have burned this place down, in my opinion. And much of the reason why Dr. King, was used in a certain way, because they knew that. They knew that there were other groups that were willing to do some damage. And they had a choice. You can either accept Dr. King and his ways, or you're going to have to deal with some people that were willing to do some more damage. Because that happens in any country. You cannot mistreat human beings. So he changed the face of this country just by giving us a blueprint as to how we deal with certain things, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I tell you, I think his whole movement really shows, even in the recent protest for George Floyd. There were peaceful protests. Mm-hmm. The reason why they worked, right? Mm-hmm. They tried to make a mockery out of them of what happened afterwards with the looting and whatnot. Right. They tried to advertise that as much as they could. Mm-hmm. But in the end, all of these were peaceful protests.
Right.
That really carried a message of you can't treat people like that.
Right.
And I think that kind of comes from Dr. King and his way of dealing with things.
Absolutely.
But when you also talk about people not wanting to just highlight the effects of Dr. King, I think there's a lot of individuals that have definitely internalized racism, mm-hmm. that hate their own races because they have been taught to hate themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's where it's scary, because sometimes people that are within our own races, right, people that identify as Black, as people of color, as people in minority communities, they don't want to talk about progress because they have been taught to not think about progress.
Yeah.
Because they have been taught that that's what they deserve.
Right.
And it's just, Dr. King wanted integration, and we're still fighting for it till this day. But it's definitely valid to say that he was the one that brought up the idea of being peaceful and protesting,
Right.
changing the norm in a very educated, respectful manner that works.
Yeah. That's so true. I mean, and that's why I always go back and I think about, because for me, when I think of, everybody knows this is not a big secret. I'm a huge Malcolm fan and follower, right? And we know that at the end of his his life, that it seemed as though Malcolm and Dr. King, at least from those who academics and activists and other people who study, tend to think that there would have been a collaboration between Dr. King and Malcolm had Malcolm lived longer, that he was going towards a different direction in his idea of human rights. That was really, you had two people that were kind of like in their own way kind of like moving towards a centerpiece. And so, I mean, I think that, and of course we saw as Dr. King later in his life began to start, I don't want to use the word second guessing his idea of they say that Dr. King once said he feels like he might have integrated his people into a burning house. I think that what I take from that is that, like everybody else, I mean, you grow. American history and American racism and American oppression is a very unique situation. And if we knew how to fix it, it still wouldn't be broken, right? And so it's easy to sit back and it's easy to do a Monday morning quarterback academic lesson as to who was right and who was wrong. I don't take that position. I admire and respect all the paradigms during that period, because I understand that they both had all of them had their own idea how to make America a better place. And for me to sit back and try to criticize the manner in which they did it would be disingenuous. And the fact that you have everybody now who can sit back and they can criticize and critique what happened without necessarily going out and doing something themselves, is sometimes, annoying, or always annoying. But what I can say is that I can definitely appreciate the man for doing, his courage, what he stood for, um, and how he stood for what he believed in. He was a human being, right? And so clearly, like everybody else, there could have been things that he tried to they said that he did, like certain things that they're saying that the way he went about it, and he should have done this. So I mean, you do have those criticism, and I want to address those things, but I think that that's disingenuous, and I think that's disrespectful, and I think that what we should do is we should actually honor his legacy and the things that he actually did for this country. He did really do something. And for somebody that's not, the question always is, as one of my favorite, talk show hosts that I listen to, is, what are you going to do about it? What are you doing, right? And if you're not doing anything except sitting around criticizing a man like Dr. King, who did some great things. And again, what changed this country, changed the face of this country, changed the ideals. And again, we're not where, we can go back and start talking about the mass incarceration and all this other stuff that we got going on right now, which is taking the place of a lot of the issues that we were dealing with. But it made a difference. This world this world was a better place, is a better place because of him. And if you can do that in your lifetime, right? If you can come 0.5% of what he did, then you've basically done some great things. So no matter what you're saying, I mean, compare your legacy to his, right? And let's see what you come out with. You know what I mean? So that's the way that I see Dr. King, and and like I said, is the older I get and the wiser I get, the more I appreciate him. You know, and what he did in his legacy. Yeah.
Yeah, and even thinking about current movements, when thinking about the way in which activists have changed, thinking about his legacy and the fact that he was willing to give up his life for a movement that was going to change the life of and I think that's something that nowadays is what we need and what we're waiting for, to take this whole issue of racial integration a step further.
Mm-hmm.
We need that type of character,
right,
of being willing to give our lives for a cause.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where Dr. King comes in.
Yeah.
This man was willing to give his life
Mm-hmm.
for everyone to have racial equality.
Yeah.
And we need that today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that when we talk about the issue of integration, because I think that, and one of the things I want to touch on is, again, as we talked about earlier, the whole idea of integration, and how integration for some people has been seen as as negative. Right? They're saying that basically integration is something that hurt black people, that before integration, black businesses thrived, and there were, these communities and, educational system and those sort of things, were better prior to better before integration. But I think that this is the issue, is that now and this is where I go back, because I do want to address it, because I'm sure there's people, I know for a fact that that's an issue. But I want to go back to that day and time. You see what I mean? In 2023, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, you can say that. But in 1960, right? I don't think a lot of people were saying that. So the point is that, there may be some degree of truth regarding segregation and the things that were beneficial during that. But legal segregation is a problem. You see what I'm saying? So I think that you have to kind of that those are two completely different issues. Legal segregation and the fact that what we did with it is a different story. And I think that the fact that you had this whole issue with African Americans maybe not realizing the importance of supporting our institutions after, I guess theoretically after integration, should have no impact on the fact that Dr. King was fighting for legal, right, integration. So legal segregation was never a good thing. But I do believe, to the extent that there is legitimate argument as to, why black institutions and black consumers and, black people should support our institutions, that's a completely different story. But I don't think that it has any impact on Dr. King's legacy. Personally, I think that's a different issue. Because if legal, if integration made black people stop supporting each other, then, you know what I mean, that's a different story. You know what I mean? I think that's another issue that we have to address. So I want to make that clear, and I think I want people to understand that the fact that there's laws that says, look, you cannot prevent somebody from coming into your business establishment because of the color of their skin, or the fact that if an ambulance decides that basically I'm not going to take you to a white hospital that's 1 mile away, you have to go to a different hospital that's 8 miles away and have that legal. That's a completely different story, and we have to understand how that looks like. It's very simplistic to think that, that legal segregation in any way is beneficial is not true. So I just kind of want to put that out there. Maybe we could have thought it a little bit. Maybe we could thought it through a little bit about how, when this happens, how we're going to move with it. But that was something that could not be accepted in any society. So that's not a good look. I just want to put that out there.
No, definitely. I think you make a point where even today, it's like just because a law changes doesn't mean that the norm changes. And Dr. King wanted to change the law, so laws change. Where we need some work on is changing the norm. And how are we going to do that? And that's the question today. Mm-hmm. But that does not take away from the significance of the fact that he was able to change the law.
Right. That's so true. That's so true, and it's important. But yeah, that's something that, and tomorrow's that day, and hopefully people will, and Dr. King is more than I have a dream speech. Right, that's the only speech that they show of Dr. King, which was a great speech. I'm not taking that away. That was definitely a great speech. But I think that there's a lot more to him to Dr. King, and I hope that we explore his greatness and really, accept and commemorate him in a way in which we should, and how he is an American hero. He's not a black hero. He's an American hero, and trust me, that's real talk. As far as trying to compare his legacy and what he did, and maybe people will realize it, maybe they won't. That's unfortunate that sometimes your legacy, it's there, and many of us recognize the greatness of it. But hopefully individuals will be, moved in a way to understand that this was not just a benefit to black people, that he, in many ways, and I'm completely convinced that he saved this country. You're
on board KCAA's Inland Talk Express. KCAA, Loma Linda, 1050 AM, the station that leaves no listener behind.
The views and opinions expressed by individuals on the following program do not necessarily reflect those of the network,